Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Aisha and I'm going to be one of the co-MCs today. I'm a Seattle organizer and I'm Palestinian. This demonstration marks 72 years of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. 72 years of the ethnic cleansing of my family, of your family. Because I'm not just speaking to Palestinians here. Colonization functions under the same white supremacist umbrella that's stepping on all of our necks. And for too long, I have sat on the sidelines. I have been ignored. And I am done arguing my right to exist. I'm not here to give you a history lesson today. I'm not here to teach you about my indigeneity, or my oppression, or my struggle for liberation. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to demand the right to exist. To demand Indigenous sovereignty, to demand an end to police violence, and to demand an end to US imperialism. July 1st marks the day of rage for Palestinians globally. This is the decision to annex the West Bank by the Netanyahu and Trump administration by using the force of the Israeli military. The Israeli military is the same person that's training the Seattle Police Department. And this is a military who systematically imprisons Palestinian children, who holds them out administrative detention, which is a fancy word for saying that they keep them without giving them trial or conviction. This is a military who tortures 73% of their illegally imprisoned children. And this is a statistic from Betty McCollum's No Way to Treat a Child campaign. And that was started to prove that our US tax dollars are funding children torture in Palestine. But I don't need statistics to prove that, because I've lived it. My cousin Saed was taken at 15 years old, and he was imprisoned for a year. No trial, no conviction, no justice. We didn't even know what jail he was in. We had no way to contact him, and he missed a year of school to be tortured for peacefully protesting his right to exist. And I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because every Palestinian in this space right here has a story similar to mine. And this is who's training the Seattle Police Department. But it would be a cheap cop-out to tell you that the police brutality in the United States is funded or caused by the Israeli military. Because the military in Israel is only 72 years old. And that's compared to 400 years of white supremacy in the United States. But we gotta remember that our oppressors borrow tools from one another. And they uphold their white supremacist agendas by working together to divide us. But just like the tools of our oppressors being connected, we gotta remember that our liberation is also interconnected. And we only will be able to resist if we stand in solidarity with one another. And that means that Palestinian liberation is Black liberation. That means that Palestinian liberation is Indigenous liberation. That means that Palestinian liberation is LGBTQ liberation. So when I say free political prisoners here and there, I mean both in the United States when 30 people were arrested at CHOP this morning, and also the 30 people who were arrested in Palestine today. We'll have some more information coming on how you can support those people. But for right now, I'm gonna hand the stage off. We have some amazing speakers today. And actually, first I should make sure that our demands are clear. Do we all know what our demands are? Okay, I'm actually gonna say it and I want you guys to respond. I know it's kind of awkward, but can you guys do that for me? Okay. So 1, defund the Seattle PD. Defund the Seattle PD. Okay, but maybe one more time. Defund the Seattle PD. Okay, that was better. Number 2, end the deadly exchange. End the deadly exchange. And 3, end Seattle's G4S contract. End Seattle's G4S contract. Miles around, okay. Well, thank you guys for being here. I'm really honored to be in community with you all.
All right, our first speaker of the day will be Patricia Allen. She is from White Center, Seattle. She identifies as an Alaskan Native and Afro-Caribbean. She is an organizer and a Women of Color Speak Out, 206 Zulu, and Intertribal Survival. She was also formerly the UW Director of Diversity Efforts and Student Advisory Board. She also got her bachelor's in Law, Societies, and Justice and American Ethnic Studies. Everybody, please put your hands up for Patricia Allen.
Thank you. Before we begin, before I share any of my words, I want to share words from my sister who's doing solidarity work down in the Bay Area, but she is Indigenous from here. She is Coast Salish. And I want to note to all of you that as I am also on a tribal council elected, I am speaking on behalf of myself as a tribal citizen, not as a tribal leader, because I want, as well as what the words I'm going to be sharing from Kalina as well, the woman who wanted to really put some thought into land acknowledgement and sharing words of Coast Salish solidarity. She's also going to be speaking as a tribal citizen because we don't want our words filtered. We don't want to have to silence how we feel, and we want to be authentic. And that means that sometimes we have to step out of our roles and out of some of our ego and what positions we're in to really voice that and do that solidarity work. And also beginning and continuing those conversations with our tribal leadership and making sure they're fully informed and fully educated on what these issues are and why that relationality is so important. So beginning, I'm sharing some words from Kalina Lawrence. So today we gather in a place called Zitzalit Lalich. That is the traditional term of this land. Zitza Lalich in the Tualashutsi language, the ancestral language of this land, stewarded by the Duwamish and Suquamish people and the Coast Salish nations, spoken by Coast Salish people since time immemorial. We have answered the call as human beings to gather physically and virtually across Mother Earth, shouting no to annexation of Palestinian lands. In partnership with Palestinians, with those of you living under occupation and those of you in exile, we across Turtle Island have witnessed young Palestinians stand at the sides of the Indigenous diaspora, of the African diaspora, for our rights to exist in self-determination. We have seen you stand for the freedom of gender and sexuality, to remember all living beings beyond humans and our responsibility to our original instructions to coexist, to protect land, water, and all elements from the exploits of capitalistic interests. We are grateful for your love, for your presence, for your call to freedom, and the release, dignity, and autonomy of all prisoners of settler colonialism. While it is true that we often find ourselves bonding over our connected experiences of oppression, like reservations, concentration camps, and gentrification, like the rubber bullets and sound grenades used against our bodies, minds, and spirits, we remember that we are also connected through teachings that have been in existence for far longer than any of these weapons and tactics. Teachings that will continue to carry us through to liberation. Like the songs our grandparents taught us, that our grandparents taught them, like our favorite foods and which seasons we are taught to harvest these plants, like our regalia and favorite jewelry made by our relatives who were taught to respectfully gather the materials which protect us and also happen to look hella fly, like our distinct artwork and the lens in which our artists show our worlds. Our mountains, our rivers, our seas, and the names we call these sacred places in the languages that they have tried so hard to strip from our minds, our tongues. And still, we give our offerings to these teachers. We express ourselves in these ways and more as our ancestors always have. Like many of our nations here, we know that how our land is treated is a reflection of the respect reserved for the sacred feminine and the spirit of the youth, or due to colonial patriarchy, the lack thereof. We are committed to learning the best ways for Salish people to stand beside you on our journey to Palestinian freedom. We exist in your right to we believe in your right to exist, steward your lands, and thrive for generations to come. And these are words shared from Kalina Lawrence, who is an organizer who's doing a lot of beautiful solidarity work, West Coast solidarity work down in the Bay. But she is a citizen of the Suquamish Nations and also Duwamish, Puyallup, Yakima, and Port Gamble Slalom. So before I start sharing some words really quick, I felt like it was necessary to take some time really quick, just a moment of silence for Rachel Corey. Rachel Corey being someone who was crushed, who was a Evergreen State college student who was there in Gaza, who was crushed by a Caterpillar bulldozer, which inspired a lot more of the divestment work that many students and now people who are alumni, including myself, really heavily supported. Thank you. As shared earlier, I was the Director of Diversity Efforts at the University of Washington for the 2013-2014 term. And during that time, I'm very sure I was the only elected Board of Directors member in the student government that was very much in support of the divestment. And a lot of that is because the argument of the BDS movement, really a lot of the technicalities and no arguments at all about the violation of the human rights itself. And so I based a lot of that work off of the fact that my minor's in human rights. I had to articulate these things my entire life, and then there are financial majors who wanted to argue this because it wasn't fiscally responsible. And so it was ridiculous how much lateral violence happened through Student Senate through that. And so I really wanted to share some facts on that a little bit, and the fact that it was about $6 million at the University of Washington that invested in these different pro-Israeli corporations, these corporations in the US that were making agreements, continuing a lot of the oppression, a lot of the genocide that was going on. And about, I would say, it was about 4.8 million of Evergreen State's funding that was embedded in some of the endowment of the University of Washington. And so as Evergreen State College Senate voted over 70% in favor of this divestment, they couldn't fully divest because the University of Washington Senate refused to approve of this legislation. So that was back in 2014. And so we're having these conversations. There are people who are present, there are people who are leading, and I really want to uplift, some of the students, especially the Palestinian students that were a part of the divestment and a part of Super, Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. And I wanted to also just briefly share with you all some things that are really important is that, you know, when the University of Washington voted on this, I had to remind people, we also voted to divest from South African apartheid oppression. And when you ask your parents, younger folks, millennials, when you ask your family how they felt about the apartheid now, it's almost like a unanimous agreement. Oh, that was oppressive, that was genocide. Well, that's what you're going to be having a conversation with your future generations on. You know, it will be more normalized that we're not going to continue to support this oppression, this apartheid, and it's even more than just apartheid, it's forms of genocide. And so although, you know, we can compare a lot of these histories with South Africa and with the Indigenous genocides and reservations, it's also something that's not comparable. What's going on right now is not comparable, but it needs to be relationship based. We need to identify these patterns, where these patterns come from. So I really wanted to just share those words and not take up too much space, but I am a part of the Tlingit and Haida Nations of Southeast Alaska, and being mindful of that history, and very grateful that we can share this space in solidarity and unity, as well as somebody who does identify as a descendant of enslaved people, both in the Caribbean and in the East Coast and the South. I really want to support and hold that space and remind us that this is history repeating itself, and unless we identify where that comes from, we can't continue to build new cycles and ancestral cycles of healing and change.
Next, we have Neda Elia, who's a Palestinian journalist and writer and political commenter. She was co-chair of the Anti-Occupation, Anti-Militarization Task Force of Incite, Women and Trans People of Color Against Violence, and served for 10 years on the steering collective of the U.S. campaign for the academic cultural boycott of Israel. Give it up for Neda.
Thank you. I'm going to keep this very short because there's so many of us and there's so much to do. And I understand that there's quite a few excellent speakers, so I'm going to keep mine short. On this day of rage, I want to talk about hope.
Closer to the mic.
On this day, when the SPD paraded their military ugliness this morning as they dismantled CHOP, on this day, when Palestinians are expecting to lose yet more land, I want to talk about winning. It's not because I am naive. It's because I want real, long-lasting victories, not symbolic ones, not short-lived ones. For that, we need to think long-term, not just look at what's happening here and now. On this day of rage, the CHOP has been dismantled, and Israel is determined, as always, to steal more Palestinian land. That's the here and now of the ugly moments. But I want to talk about hope. So let me tell you what is happening also today. Today, people are coming together like never before to rise against a system we know oppresses us all. Our numbers are growing. Today, there's a deep understanding that justice is indivisible, that the militarization of the police here in Seattle, as everywhere in the US, is deeply connected to the brutal occupation in Palestine. Today, we are energized by a militant solidarity that will not back down, that will not be cowed into going back home, admitting defeat just because the CHOP has been dismantled or because Palestinian land is going to be annexed. Today, we are no longer willing to settle for reform. We are making absolutist demands because we know the whole system is corrupt. As many organizers have noted, the system is not broken, it is functioning exactly as it is designed to function. It was designed to oppress us. So what we need is radical change, not fixing the system, but starving the system. And so today, the same demand is being made from this unceded Duwamish land to Palestine: defund the oppressors. Stop bankrolling the killing of our people. Channel the money away from law enforcement, which only understands criminalization, into services and justice-oriented community initiatives. It is this coming together, this common demand, grounded in a deep understanding of how our struggles are connected, that gives me hope. And our demands are finally being heard and acted upon. Make no mistake about it, we are winning. Regardless of the ugliness that is still going on the ground, city councils all across the country are voting to redirect money away from police departments into community services. Black Lives Matter has forced not just a national conversation, but an actual examination with accountability of racist law enforcement violence. This is a movement, not a moment, and there will be ups and downs, but there is no going back, and we are making progress. And the same thing is happening in Palestine. Israel is determined to go on with the theft of Palestinian land, but the global conversation around this issue has changed. There is talk in the US of holding Israel accountable, and the US is Israel's enabler. Yes. The US, as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. put it first over 50 years ago, is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Today there's a letter circulating in the House of Representatives addressed to Mike Pompeo, asking for conditioning aid to Israel if it goes ahead with annexation. 4 women spearheaded the letter. 3 are women of color: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, our own Pramila Jayapal, and Betty McCollum, a very strong white ally, a politician with the integrity to have actually barred AIPAC from her office more than 20 years ago. This morning, Bernie Sanders tweeted that we cannot allow US dollars to be used to violate Palestinians' human rights. This is our demand. It's a common demand. Defund our oppressor. And it has made its way up from the grassroots to the top. From Seattle to Palestine, channeling money away from the systems of violence into services is a basic demand for all our oppressed communities. This demand opens up hopeful possibilities of a life with safety, with dignity, for those of us who have been criminalized simply because of who we are, because of the color of our skin, because of our religion, because of our place of birth. And this is the demand we are coming together to make, from this unceded Duwamish land to Palestine. The connections between Black, Indigenous, Brown, immigrant, and Palestinian people are strong, and they are getting stronger, and these connections are making us all powerful. We may be losing some battles, we are still taking over the world. Our militant solidarity is our power. We cannot and will not back down on our demands. We have nothing to lose and everything to win as we combine our energy, our outrage, our rage, our anger to say, defund the police in Seattle, in all of the US, and end US military aid to Israel. And just like Black Lives Matter is a movement, not a moment, So this day of rage is a movement. It is, and we welcome you all to join, because together we can and we will win. Together we say no to annexation. Together we say Black Lives Matter. And together we say decolonize this land. Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have Edie Hampton from Decrim Seattle and King County Equity Now.
How y'all doing? One more time, how y'all doing? Hey, loud enough. Let me get it one more time. Okay. My name's Edie Hampton, and I don't know if you guys heard that situation over there, but that's a product of this culture. You know, these elites have built a culture that is not conducive with nature. It's not even good for themselves. And then they perpetuate it into our broader cultures, and we all assimilate to it. So that right there is a prime example. He was schizophrenic. You know what I'm saying? And this culture made him into that. Just like it made my mother. My mother's schizophrenic too. She's a product of the war on drugs, which was really a war on black people, just like the imperialists have a war on indigenous culture all over the planet. Because that's what globalization really is. Globalization is a war on indigenous sovereignty in Africa, in Palestine, in the Central District. That's why I'm with King County Equity Now, because we need equity now. We're not going to stand for this apartheid in the Central District. We're not going to stand for this Jim Crow system in the Central District, right in our own city. My family been here since the 40s. We built the CD. We've seen Kwame Ture and Martin Luther King come here. We've seen Aaron Dixon and Elmer Dixon stand up for our people and police our own communities. We don't need none of this in our communities. We don't need no police in our communities. We handled it ourselves. That's why they destroyed the Black Panther Party, because they knew they'd be out of a job. Because it's not about policing our communities. It's about de-escalation. It's about creating peace. It's about waking people up to what our real problems are, and showing these youth how they should be moving. As Dr. Huey P. Newton says, the revolution is in the hands of the youth. Am I right? It was the youth in Birmingham, Alabama that rose up and started the civil rights movement. 13-year-olds, middle schoolers, getting arrested. Police were arresting children. Children. And you mean to tell me 50 plus years later, the youth are still having to rise up? It's still having to be us? This culture's not for us, bro. Sis, fam, it's not for us. We need to make sure that we're actively decolonizing ourselves every day, every week. Black lives don't just matter today, it's gonna matter tomorrow too. I don't wanna see everybody in August like, oh, quarantine's over. Let's go back to work and kick it and go to the festivals. No, that's over with. This is our festival right here. We can have just as much fun dismantling this system and defunding the fucking police. Excuse my language, children. We can have just as much fun. We got speakers, we got music. We can do it all. So for all you Proud Boys out there that's perpetuating this culture of domination, thinking there's an elite race, you're wrong, bro. There is no elite race. All life comes out of Africa. We are all one people. And people need to respect Africa. People need to respect blackness, because when blackness was created, Blackness wasn't created. Whiteness was created. White was created. White was created in the 1600s. And when black was created, it was in resistance to white. That's the only reason. There was no, you guys was Anglo-Saxons, we was Africans, we was Angolans, we was Congolese, whatever we were. That's when it was created. And since our cultures was erased from us when we were brought here, we had to create what we created, because we're some of the most resilient people on this planet, and everybody knows it. So get that anti-blackness, figure out how anti-black you are, get that out of you, and please keep moving with us. Proud Boys, figure your shit out, because it's not working. It's not gonna work. The people are rising up, the youth are rising up, and they're gonna keep driving this movement, and I'm gonna keep being a gas in my tank and their tank and all of our tanks. So that's my time. Peace and power. Thank you, everybody.
Next, we're going to bring up Nikita Oliver. She is also an organizer with DeCrim Seattle and King County Equity Now. Let's put your hands together for Nikita Oliver, everybody.
Peace and power, community. Say it back. I'm gonna do that one more time. Peace and power, community. Because our peace, our power is in our ability to build community. It's in our people power. That's why we say all power to who? The people. All power to who? The people. All power to who? The people. Yo, fuck these fictitious colonial borders. We didn't put this shit here. We didn't decide what the lines were, and yet we get in line with them. I'm here today because I don't want to be complicit. I don't want to keep buying into the imperialist machine, the military machine that does exchanges between the Seattle Police Department and the Israeli Defense Force. I don't want to be a part of a machine that accepts oppression in one place so that we can have privilege in another place. Racialized capitalism is built upon exploitation. We live here in what was later called Martin Luther King County. It was later named after who we know to be the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That's not who it was originally named after. We live in a city named after a Duwamish chief on Duwamish land, a city which makes a spectacle of progressive language. It makes a spectacle of what it means to be radical. We have elected officials who talk about the right thing and do the wrong action. Any movement which does not include our relatives in other places is a failed movement. It is a movement built upon the backs of people we cannot see, and yet their bodies help us to sustain. When Ferguson happened, I remember seeing footage of Ferguson activists going to Palestine and Palestinian activists doing exchanges with Ferguson activists. And to me, that was one of the most radical things we could see, living in a nation state which ultimately sends weapons to their oppressor. For us to actively be building bonds, solidarity with other oppressed peoples is a direct attack on fascism. You cannot say you are against the fascist government if your government is giving weapons and income to another fascist government to oppress another peoples. There are people being brutalized by forces all over the world, and it is our duty to fight for each other, regardless of whether or not we see each other's faces. And our Palestinian relatives here today, I see your faces in your lineage. I hope you see in my face my people, my family, my lineage, the black peoples I come from, are stolen peoples. I come from a stolen peoples, a people stripped of our culture, a people stripped of our religion, a people stripped of our language. That is what's happening to Palestinian people. When we think about the Gaza Strip, there are people being held in a prison, an open air prison that you cannot escape. People want to justify the force used against folks in the Gaza Strip because they launched some fire across the fictitious border. How is that any different than what Jimmy Durkin is trying to do to us here by justifying rubber bullets, justifying mace and gas and imprisonment, the stealing of protesters, when it is the police? It is this oppressive force that has caused the harm in the first place. So if we want to have our analysis right, we have to start defending the right to protect ourselves, start defending the right to self-defense. When we stand up to an oppressor that has been brutalizing us for hundreds of years, that is not doing harm, that is protecting yourself. And we must defend each other. We must protect each other because we have nothing to lose but our what? We have nothing to lose but our what? And if your chains get pulled off and the chains are still left on Palestinian peoples, we are not unchained. We are just living on their bodies and their sacrifice and their enslavement, and that is unacceptable. We are not in a civil rights movement. We are in a human rights movement. Human rights for all people everywhere, to have access to clean water, to protect the land, to have housing, health care, clean food, healthy food, education, employment, opportunity, and most importantly, self-determination. At the end of this, it is about self-determination. It is your right to choose who you are, who you're going to be, and how you're going to live. So say it with me. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and protect each other.
We must love and protect each other.
Everyone.
Everyone.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Say it louder so these motherfuckers up here can hear. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
One more time. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and protect each other.
We must love and protect each other.
Everyone.
Everyone.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Ashe.
Ashe.
From the Duwamish territories to Ferguson to Palestine. Power to who?
The people.
Power to who?
The people.
Power to who?
The people.
Ashe.
Ashe.
How's everyone doing? Yeah. Thanks for coming out here. So, as Aisha mentioned, I'm up here with my sister Amani, our sister Aisha. We're with a collective called Palestiniyat. We got started because as Palestinian feminists, as Palestinian women, we were often getting pushed to the margins. We were often getting pushed out of spaces for doing the silent work. So we just decided we didn't want to be silent anymore. So that's why we're here. We both have a couple things to say. I'll keep it short. This isn't the first time Seattle's seen a protest against Israeli annexation. I actually grew up alongside marches that list the names of Palestinians who have been murdered by the IDF and villages that have been turned into settlements over the years. At some point, I just learned to hope that it wasn't my family's village that was listed along those settlements, and that it wasn't my family's names that were listed on the screen of the lost. But today, we're all here again. We're not tired. We're not giving up hope, but we are enraged. Are y'all enraged? Because that's why we're here. Today is the day of rage. We're enraged at the continued annexation of Palestine. We're enraged at the continued murders of our Black neighbors. We're enraged at the continued theft and dismemberment of Indigenous lands here in Turtle Island and globally. I'm enraged because in 2019, the US gave $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, but we have the highest rates of coronavirus to date in the world, and that disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous communities. And our government is putting no money into solving this problem. I'm enraged because Israel uses a portion of that $3.8 billion to invent new violence and murder tactics on Palestinians and then sells those tactics to the US police as violence and murder tactics on Black, brown, and poor people. I'm enraged because when our families in exile became displaced into the United States, we adopted some of the same settler practices as our oppressors. I'm enraged because the grocery store that called 911 on George Floyd was owned by a Palestinian immigrant family. And I'm enraged because Derek Chauvin ended George Floyd's life with his knee, and the same murder tactic was used on the neck of a Palestinian. There has never been a more important time than now to commit to an anti-colonial struggle. Palestine will be free. Turtle Island will be free. Indigenous sovereignty globally will be restored. And in order for that to happen, our rage has to be channeled into action. I had an anti-colonial awakening in 2015 when I was restricted from returning to my family's village in the West Bank by the IDF. And you can't see this, but return is in capital because we all have the right to return, and one day we will return. A full day, I was physically and verbally assaulted by Israeli border security, and I couldn't leave because they took my passport, and I couldn't move because they held me at gunpoint for a day. And it'll be another 5 years before I can even try to return again, and I likely won't, knowing that, because after the Naksa, even my grandmother couldn't return. So for those of us in exile waiting to return, we need a dismantling of not just occupied Palestine, but of all borders. We need a dismantling not just of the IDF and G4S surveillance tactics, but of all forms of policing and surveillance cultures. And we need an overthrow not just of the settler colonial Zionist state, but of all settler colonial states, including this one. So today we're demanding to defund Seattle PD, to return those funds to the community, to end the deadly exchange between the IDF, or the Israeli military, and Seattle police, to release all arrested protesters, and to end the SPD security contract with G4S. And we're demanding those so that tomorrow, all occupied people can return to our rightful homes. This is our shared intifada. This is our shared intifada.
Hello, assalamu alaikum to all. Can y'all hear me? Peace be upon you, upon this gathering, and upon all those fighting persecution around the world. I want to begin by recognizing that we are settlers upon stolen and colonized Duwamish land, and that the movement for the liberation of Palestine is the movement for accountability in all settler colonial projects, including that of Turtle Island, and the one we are most contributing to. We need to recognize also that without the Black liberation movement in the US, we wouldn't be able to organize today. All oppressed people owe our fight to the Black freedom fighters globally. We are here today because Israel has announced its plans to annex the rest of Ghur al-Urdun, the Jordan Valley. But language is important in all struggles. So let's be clear about this one. Palestine is no exception. Let's be clear about what this annexation really is. It's theft. It's pure, old-fashioned settler colonial theft. No different than the theft of Turtle Island by white settlers. No different to the theft of Palestinian land before 1948 to create what some now call Israel. I, though, will continue to call that land Palestine, Palestine. My homeland. This whole thing happened before. In 1948, when my grandmother was told by the ancestor to the IDF, the Haganah, that what would happen in Deir Yassin, the Israeli massacre of a whole village of men, women, and children, would happen to her if she did not leave her beachfront house in Jaffa, what is now known as Tel Aviv. She was forced, ethnically cleansed like so many other Palestinian women, to march to safety with their newborn twin babies in tow. She lived her life yearning for the beach of Jaffa, and at one point finally got the opportunity to visit 20 years later. With a flimsy paper Israeli visa that gave her 2 weeks of home. She made a beeline for her beachfront house in Jaffa and went to use her key. It would not open the door until a white Israeli woman demanded to know what she was doing in her home. When my grandma explained to the woman that she would just like to see her house once more, the Israeli settler threatened to call the pigs the police. My grandma would then die a refugee, always yearning for the beaches of her homeland. The ethnic cleansing, the one we're just promised would continue with the US's now publicly unconditional approval and 122.3 billion US tax dollars, is funded by us. Just as the Seattle Police Department is, Israel is overfunded as well, with money that could and should instead go to healthcare services so that those of us in the 99% don't have to choose between medical bankruptcy or death. It should go to under-resourced schools. Instead of leaving poor black and brown students with fewer opportunities than their poverty-funded white and wealthy counterparts. It should go to clean water in Flint, Michigan, and to a community investment fund, as Seattle King County Black Lives Matter is demanding of the funds so generously allocated to the Seattle Police Department. These billions of tax dollars are wasted, instead, on racist checkpoints, manned with the same weaponry of the Seattle Police Department. Checkpoints that work to slow down ambulances, leading to the deaths of the sick, the injured, and even birthing Palestinians. Mothers who oftentimes lose their lives or their babies from complications of childbirth in a car with an ambulance waiting helplessly right across the road. Checkpoints that kill Palestinians routinely, including Iyad Erekat, who was on his way to pick up his mother and sister from the salon to take them to her wedding. He committed the greatest crime of all. He crashed his car while being Palestinian, and he paid for it with his life. The Israeli soldiers shot him as he raised his arms over his head. The ambulance was not allowed through while the Israeli soldiers watched him bleed to death. These tax dollars are wasted on tear gas against Palestinians protesting for their freedoms from a settler colonial state, from a military occupation, from administrative detentions, with the same tear gas that the Seattle Police Department uses against those protesting those same damn things right here at home. The tear gas is also used, funnily enough, in Palestinian neighborhoods and schools. During the Ferguson protests, Palestinians in Palestine took to Twitter to teach protesters how to deal with the tear gas that was first used against them. Just as we fund our own brutality by the hands of the police here at home, we overfund overwhelming brutality against Palestinians by the hands of Israel in Palestine. So we are here standing in front of the West Precinct of the Seattle PD, now to demand 3 things. Defund the Seattle PD.
Defund the Seattle PD.
End the deadly exchange.
End the deadly exchange.
And end the SPD security contract with G4S.
End the SPD security contract with G4S.
Thanks, guys. I know that was a handful. We're rallying now, but we do need action. Israel is going to postpone its theft of Palestinian lands until this outrage dies out. But we will keep fighting. I ask that you familiarize yourself with BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement. look into your own consumption habits and boycott companies that profit off of Israeli human rights violations against Palestinians. Have your schools and corporations divest from those same companies and demand that your nation sanction Israel. Don't let this conversation die out. And remember, from Turtle Island to Palestine, resistance is always justified when people are occupied. Say it with me, free Palestine!
Free Palestine!
Black Lives Matter!
Black Lives Matter!
Thanks so much.
Our next speaker is going to be Linda Rigor. She's a community activist in the militant Filipino youth organization, Anak Bayan, and is on the Secretariat of the International League of People's Struggle Seattle Tacoma chapter. Please welcome Linda Rigor.
How's everybody doing? All right, I'm gonna start with the chant. When I say long live, everybody says international solidarity. Are we ready? Yeah! Long live!
International solidarity!
Long live!
International solidarity!
Thank y'all. All right. Warm and militant greetings, comrades and allies. I am Linda Rigor. I'm representing Bayan USA as a member of Anak Bayan South Seattle. Bayan USA is an anti-imperialist, multi-sectoral alliance of Filipinos fighting for national liberation, genuine democracy, and socialism for our people in our homeland, the Philippines. Bayan is also a member organization of the International League of People's Struggle, an international anti-imperialist alliance of organizations around the world, which is taking part in this day of rage in many cities and countries in response to the international call of our member organization, Samidoun. We rage in solidarity with the Palestinian people against the US-backed Zionist settler colonial state. We reject this latest attempt to squash the Palestinian right to resist illegal occupation. Our movement draws great inspiration from the Palestinians' bold and courageous struggle. The determined resistance of Palestinian people through more than 70 years of Nakba proves that the fascist schemes of the Zionist state of Israel and US imperialism are no match for a people resolved to win liberation in our lifetime. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. As settlers, migrants, and displaced people in Turtle Island, we have a responsibility to strike a decisive blow inside the belly of the beast that is extending its fascist reach to the third world. As we stand on Duwami's coast-shameless land, we must recognize and acknowledge that the land that Benjamin Netanyahu seeks to grab belongs to the Palestine people. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of the U.S. foreign assistance since World War II, having received $142.3 billion in bilateral U.S. assistance and missile defense funding. U.S. foreign and military aid has bankrolled this genocidal war on the Palestinian peoples, killed tens of thousands of people in the Philippines, while locally police officers pocket six-figure salaries to terrorize poor, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. We know that the IDF prototypes and test police and military hardware and technologies on Palestinians that police departments then use in the U.S. We know that the IDF trains police across the globe, from Minneapolis police officers who murdered George Floyd to Chief Carmen Best here in Seattle to the Philippine National Police and the armed forces of the Philippines who actively carry out fascist violence against the people in my homeland. The pro-US reactionary government of the Philippines is escalating its war on the Filipino people. Indigenous Lumad communities, moral Muslim communities, and revolutionary leaders through passing a new anti-terror bill.
We know that the same tear gas used in Ferguson was made by the same company that makes the tear gas used to repress the people's struggle in Palestine. These very same forces across the globe and here in Seattle use these shared militarized tactics to criminalize, displace, and murder our peoples. We join in demand to end the deadly exchange between SPD and the IDF and to end the G4S contract with city security. No more to police terrorism against the people. Defund the Seattle police. Defund Israel Defense Forces. Seattle and ILPS stands unequivocally on the side of the Palestinian people against the continued repression and displacement of Palestinian peoples, the illegal seizure of land, and the U.S. imperialists who only seek to exploit and profit. We stand with the Black communities rising up against the fascist policing of their communities and with the protesters all around the world defending Black lives and Black liberation. Both Palestine and the Philippines are key strategic locations the U.S. empire seeks to use in its ruthless mission to control and exploit every region of the world. Just as imperialism increases its power by occupying and dominating our homelands, every struggle that can successfully break the chains of U.S. domination and win true sovereignty serves to strengthen all other struggles and weaken the empire that oppresses us. Let's unite our struggles against imperialism and win liberation for our people. As Palestine revolutionary Leila Khaled said when she visited the Philippines, as long as the imperialists globalize their system, we will globalize as well. Victory to Palestine, victory to Black liberation struggle, victory to the Philippine National Democratic Movement. I'm gonna end with another chant. Ready? So when I say from Palestine to Philippines, y'all say, and stop the US war machine. So, okay. From Palestine to the Philippines.
Stop the US war machine.
From Palestine to the Philippines.
Stop the US war machine.
Thank y'all.
Next up, we have Yusuf Mahmoud from DCRIM Seattle. He's a local Palestinian, a revolutionary, and a police abolitionist.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. What's good? How you guys doing today? I don't know about you guys, but I am filled with rage. I'm filled with rage about a lot of different things, both locally and internationally. In terms of the treatment of the oppressed, in terms of the treatment of the indigenous populations and the Black and brown bodies who have been brought here involuntarily. I've been down here on the ground almost every day since this whole fiasco has started here in Seattle. And what I've seen has reminded me of Gaza and the West Bank. When we see the SPD come out with the bail technique, where they break our protesters down into small groups so they can flood them with tear gas and arrest as many people as possible. We understand where these techniques come from. When we see officers from the SPD using the same kneeling technique taught through Krav Maga against George Floyd, the same technique that we see in the West Bank, the same technique that we see within 48 proper, what we call the indigenous and historic Palestine. I'm tired of seeing this shit. I'm tired of Chief Best, an individual who graduated from that same exchange program, sitting here and telling us about lawlessness. The only agitator I've seen down here on these streets is the SPD and any bitch-ass khanzir that wants to roll around with them. Now we're tired. We're tired. We are frustrated. And today we're bringing this frustration to our people here. We need to bring this to the Black community here. As we're talking about annexation, we need to understand what's happening in the South End. We need to understand what's happening in the Central District. And we need to understand the purpose of all of this. We see the mayor complain about not having the resources or the ability to affect positive change, but we know we have the money. Our police budget is $400 million. $400 million. And we can't afford to pay back in reparations to the black community. We can't afford to have medical professionals respond to non-violent 911 calls. We can't fix and figure out mental health professionals who are willing to help the people here. To piggyback off what my comrade and brother Ed Hampton spoke about earlier, we understand that this system is designed in this way. If you're not born into the right family, if you do not have the right color skin, if you're not born into the right zip code, your future is indeterminately determined by that. So what are we going to do about it? What are we as a collective, as people from all of these indigenous communities, black and brown communities, our brothers and sisters from the Philippines and from South America, what are we going to do to hold these people accountable? We need to gather ourselves collectively with real solidarity. That means putting our bodies here for our black and brown brothers and sisters, the same way we expect them to come for us and hold it down for us. That means putting our money behind these black and brown businesses and these revolutionaries and these people who are here putting their bodies on the line every goddamn day. I'm mad. I'm full of rage. I'm full of rage standing here in front of the West Precinct. Now, many of you may not know, but I unfortunately went to Cornish College of the Arts just down the street. And the amount of times I can tell you about being late to class because I was followed by one of these khanzir right in here with their hand on their gun for blocks. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not trying to get shot running to class. You feel me? I'm not trying to be in a city where I know because I'm wearing a kufiya, I'm instantly a target not only of white nationalism, but of the SPD. I'm tired of being humiliated. Anytime one of these pulls us over, I'm tired of standing there and waiting outside my car in the rain for an hour and a half to 2 hours so one supervisor can show up or two supervisors can show up. And guess what? We know exactly where all of these systems come from. We know what the root is. So what do? Do we allow them to do it, or do we defund the SPD? Defund SPD. Defund SPD. Man, I gotta say, this is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever personally seen. As a Palestinian from Seattle, as a Palestinian who grew up here in these streets, it is beautiful to see all the black, brown, and indigenous faces here, and our white allies who are putting themselves on the line and showing we will not allow you to annex the lifeblood of the West Bank. 93% of all agriculture comes from the Jordan Valley. So you need to understand what this annexation is. You need to understand that if we allow the state of Israel to completely block off and surround the West Bank, the future of Palestinian autonomy is dead. The future of a two-state solution is dead. So the only thing that we can do is collectively use our bodies, use our voices, use our resources, and the fact that we are here in the United States, the sole proprietor of the state of Israel, and the reason that they're allowed to do all of these human rights violations and get off scot-free. And if anyone up here is wondering why this is so important to me, why I hope we can really fight the anti-blackness within us, the colorism within all of our communities, is because my life right now is a representation of all of these parties coming together. My son is Palestinian, he is Caucasian, he is African American, and he is an Indigenous American as well. If we could come together in unity for the betterment of all of us, no amount of hatred or anger can stop us, because our rage is justified. Thank all of you guys for showing up. I just got to say two things. Free Palestine, and long live Black liberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Yusuf. By the way, that is my husband, and this is our son right here. So next up, we're going to bring up Guy Oren. He's a member of the End Deadly Exchange campaign, and we'll talk about our demands to the city of Seattle. Let's put our hands together.
Defund SPD!
Defund SPD!
Defund SPD!
Defund SPD!
Hi all, my name is Guy Owen. I'm a member of the End the Deadly Exchange campaign. We are here, first off, to endorse King County Equity Now's demands and decriminalize Seattle's demands to defund the Seattle PD by at least 50%. Reallocate those funds to community-led health and safety systems. And release protesters arrested during the uprising without charges. Seattle is complicit in Israeli apartheid, colonialism, and military occupation. Over the past decade, 5 SPD officers, including Chief Best, have traveled and had trainings in Israel at the cost of tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars. These exchanges result in the transfer of worst practices, including surveillance, militarization, anti-protester brutality, and dehumanizing counter-terrorism strategies. This is not okay. We say enough is enough. We are calling on the City Council to pass an ordinance banning all trainings and cooperation between the SPD and the Israeli police and military forces. This past fall, Seattle signed a 5-year contract with the security company G4S. G4S is a horrible corporation with blood on its hands and has helped repress indigenous movements around the world. It is a chief collaborator with Israeli apartheid and occupation. G4S helps run Israel's National Police Academy and also provides surveillance technology to Israel. It is unacceptable that Seattle has contracted with such a murderous corporation. We demand that the City of Seattle end its contract with G4S now. Over the coming days, we will be targeting the Seattle City Council until they pass legislation in accordance with these demands. This is a movement, not a moment. We must organize. We invite you all to continue joining us in fighting against police terror and Israeli and American colonialism. Thank you. Solidarity.
All right. So, as we're coming to the end of this, I did just want to read off some names of African American people here who were killed by the SPD. And she's also gonna list off some names as well of people that have been killed by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, all right?
We're gonna go back and forth.
All right, so first we have Sean Lee Fur,
Ahmed Erekat,
Malik Williams,
Iyad Al-Halak,
Montree Norris,
Fadi Samara,
Anosa Strickland,
Bahmid Al-Awadi,
Eugene Nelson,
Zaid Qasia,
Charlena Lyles,
Islam Dawarkat,
My Chance Dunlap Gittins,
Sufyan Al-Khawaji,
Shay Taylor,
Muhammad Hamal,
Deontrell Davis,
Ziad Mansour,
Michael Ely,
Salam Ahmed Salam,
Leslie Allen Black,
Muhammad Naeem,
Chastity Leclerc,
Maher Zatra,
Renee Davis,
Bakir Kurt. And I think we want to close it off with some chants, if y'all are cool with that. Okay, cool. You want to go first?
Whose streets is it?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
Defund.
SPD.
Defund.
SPD.
Defund.
SPD.
Defund.
SPD.
I want everybody to repeat: free, free Palestine.
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 Thank you guys so much. I do have one more thing to say before we go. I just want to bring it all together again at how, you know, the intersectionality between all of our communities, it's important why we work together. You know, the same thing going on in Palestine. The ethnic cleansing, you know, of African Americans from our culture. The ethnic cleansing of Native Americans here. It's all the same thing, and by the same exact oppressors that are working together, sharing money, funding each other. We have to shut this all down and educate it and make a better place for our people. Thank you so much and have a great day. I apologize, guys. I got too excited there. I do want to direct you guys